It may be hard, but I want you to try to think back a decade, actually slightly less than a decade. In 2000, we were celebrating the Millennium. And if you remember what was happening at that time, it was an enormous celebration of a new global capitalism, of globalization, of the end of conflict in the world, of a new world order. We were told there were countless articles and books coming out around 2000 saying that we had charted the path to permanent prosperity. Even Ben Bernanke, who's now chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, said in 2002 that we basically eliminated the business cycle, that we were now in a phase that he called the Great Moderation. And what we had to explain nowadays was why everything worked out right. There was a celebration, of course, of having demolished the Soviet Union, of the collapse of Eastern Europe, the triumph of capitalism worldwide, of the rise of the stock market. And they kept on coming out with books saying the stock market is going to rise to this level and then that level and then on ad infinitum. There was a whole celebration of U.S. dominance in the world. Of course, there were protesters. Remember, in Seattle in the Northwest in November 1999, there was a great struggle over globalization. And the anti-globalization movement was emerging. But overall, what you had was this celebration of a unified system, of the end of history, as one famous writer, Francis Fukuyama, called it. And there were not going to be any more crises. Socialism was dead, and we were beginning to move on the ecological issue, and the United States was triumphant internationally as well. Well, all of that seems like ancient history to us now. In fact, only shortly after the Millennium Celebration, we had George Bush elected President of the United States. In fact, just about that time, and that's just before he was elected, in the summer of 2000, we had a stock market crash. The stock market bubble went out, and the bubble burst, and what we call the high-tech bubble, and it was followed by a recession. And miraculously, the economy seemed to recover from the recession very quickly, because they did what they called at the time the Great Bubble Transfer. They created a second bubble, the housing bubble, that took over and revived the financial system very rapidly, and the economy revived, but it wasn't rapid growth, it was simply escaping from recession. Shortly after that, of course, by 2003, the United States was invading Iraq after the 9/11 event, invading Afghanistan and Iraq. And the main issue then became empire. People rediscovered that the United States was an empire, that imperialism existed in the world, and a massive peace movement grew up globally, the biggest peace movement that we have seen in decades. The crisis of U.S. society at that time was a war crisis, an empire crisis. And that continued. There was a sense within a couple of years as well that something had gone wrong seriously on the environment. We all knew that the environment was in trouble. But in 2002, when they had the World Council on Sustainable Development, the United States didn't go to the meetings in Johannesburg. The United States stayed out. The United States, under the Bush administration, refused to sign the Kyoto Protocol, or refused to go along with that, refused to acknowledge global warming. And within a year or two, it was discovered that global warming or climate change was more serious than anybody had thought, that the darkest fears of the climate scientists in the early 1990s were not only proven to be correct, but turned out to be underestimates of the seriousness of the problem. So suddenly the ecological crisis looms large, and we begin to talk about not global warming, but climate change, and understanding that if the climate is changed, everything else is changed, and beginning to recognize how serious this is. Of course, some of us had been arguing this for a long time. I wrote a book called The Vulnerable Planet in 1994. But the acknowledgement of global warming, of climate change, the universal acknowledgement of it in the face of these changes was a dramatic turn. And so the ecological crisis comes along, and we suddenly realize, I think globally it's understood now that if we continue on our current path, we will destroy civilization and life on the planet as we know it. And if this wasn't bad enough, in 2007, in the summer of 2007, we started to have a financial crisis, which got worse, and by the fall of 2008, we saw the collapse of Lehman Brothers and a full-fledged crisis, a decline as steep initially as in the Great Depression following the 1929 stock market crash, and very, very serious economic crisis, the worst since the Great Depression, which we are still in the midst of. So suddenly we have this situation where the empire crisis didn't really go away. In fact, Obama sort of ran initially on the ticket, taking care of that. Of course, we can see how the administration is taking care of it, because the war has actually stepped up, if we include both Afghanistan and Iraq. The empire crisis is still there, and we need to talk about it and what it means. But the ecological crisis is there as well. We are facing what we could call the ultimate environmental crisis in the world that threatens our species and over half of world species within a matter of decades. Our civilization is in jeopardy as long as current trends continue.